So I was born in Louisiana, and I was mentored by Dr. Dorothy Irene Height. Yeah, give it up for Dr. Height. And if you're watching in the future, that was not AI, those are real people who were clapping and laughing. I think, I'm not sure. Dr. Height mentored me, and she ran the National Council of Negro Women. And in that process, she was part of creating and being a part of the March on Washington on August 28th, 1963. In fact, they were the only women's group who was a part of that. Unfortunately, no women actually were allowed to speak at the March on Washington. Only the men, and then people could sing. I bring her up because the first thing to solve this plastic crisis by 2040 is this. If we have women, particularly black and brown and indigenous women, young people and queer people leading this movement, we can solve the plastic crisis. Thank y'all so much. Good night. All right, I got more for you. So in that march, the March on Washington on August 28, 1963, Dr. King spoke, and he said that he had a dream, and that hopefully, because of equality, we'll be free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we'll be free at last. Well, I'm from Louisiana, and then on August 28th, 29th of 2005, literally 20 years ago, Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans, and it decimated. Over 2,000 people lost their lives. And more importantly, people were left behind, particularly black, brown, and indigenous people were left to die in the richest country in the world. That is the real impact of the climate crisis, which is not a hoax if someone else is listening. And in that process, not only were they left behind to die, but when they were looking for higher ground, they literally were trying to cross the Crescent City Connection Bridge in 100-degree weather. People were dying. Grandmothers were beginning to wilt and die on the road. Children, babies, were dying in their mother's arms because they had not had food and water for days. They found the only bridge they can cross to go across to the other city from New Orleans called Gretna, Louisiana. And instead of being welcomed in this country as Americans, they were stopped on the bridge with dogs and rifles and turned to turn around. And on that bridge, many people died. And we at Hip Hop Caucus decided to cross that bridge. And so literally today, 20 years ago, almost on this day, we crossed that bridge. But the thing, though, that when we crossed that bridge, we were marching for justice. We were marching for the people. But in this movement, we realized that we are not going to march to a place where we can actually get rid of plastics. What we found out is that, yes, we are in the midst of a climate crisis. And yes, we are in the midst of a plastics crisis. But at the root of all that, what we have found out in those 20 years, that we are also in the midst of a crisis of imagination. We are not telling the story so that people can understand what needs to be done. And so one of the things that we have seen is that, in the words of Tony K. Bambara, that the role of the artist can make the revolution irresistible. Yes. And so with that, we realize that our movement that gets caught up in data and research and white paper energy to the extreme, it's missing the point of telling the story, of communicating, of making sure that people understand. And so while artists have been amazing, artists like Mark Ruffalo and Don Cheadle and Jane Fonda and the amazing Anthony Smith, those actors are fighting to make sure that the pension funds and other things can cut away from having fossil fuels in them. But more importantly, what we're seeing is that those artists and actors are also realizing they want to tell good stories, not just climate stories, but stories that can captivate and change the world. But here's the hard part. Our movement, in the words of Bell Hooks, doesn't understand that the rage of the oppressed is not the same as the rage of the privileged. And we have to understand that while we're talking about this, that to people, it seems like we're talking about this from the rage of the privileged and not the rage of the oppressed, which is so sad because when you talk about petrochemicals and Cancer Alley, which is right where I'm from, that 85-mile stretch of land between Baton Rouge and New Orleans, the folks who are oppressed, who are dying because of the fossil fuel industry's business plan, they are the ones who should be able to have the great stories and the communication to tell the stories to inspire the world to create change, to pull back away. But that's not happening because our movement looks more like the rage of the privileged than it does of the rage of the oppressed. It's true. I can go through all the facts and tell you about how we are finding plastics in the placenta. I can tell you how people where I'm from are dying because of petrochemicals in their community. There are over 200 petrochemical and plastic facilities in Louisiana. I can tell you about how we're consuming a credit card size with the plastic every single day. I can tell you how there are folks who our arteries are getting harder and they're dying in low-income communities from Newark to Detroit to Miami. I could tell you how particularly the most vulnerable of our communities are dying because of plastic pollution. I could tell you how bad it's getting. I could tell you on the other side, folks who are on the other side of the spectrum politically are also upset about plastic. This is not a left or a right issue. Maybe different. I'm even mad about it because they're putting petrochemical facilities in my community in Louisiana, whereas on the other side, they're mad because plastics makes men smaller. And so they're outraged because of that. But it's common ground. We have found common ground, and we will figure out how to meet in the middle. We have to get real close to meet in the middle, but we have to figure out how to meet in the middle somehow. But they're upset, and they should be upset, because we're finding plastics in our bodies. And we're now finding our babies being born with plastic, which is why we need to have imagination to back up from the reins, to allow women and young people and queer and trans to lead this movement. And I know what that means. A lot of y'all are very comfortable, and that is the first part of imagination, is imagine yourself not being a leader. Second part is to imagine yourself telling a story, and imagine it not just be through talking points, but imagine us telling stories that actually inspire and connect us in a way. Let me conclude with this. I'm actually speaking not actually to you, honestly. I'm actually speaking to another generation who I hope will see this video. I'm actually speaking to the fact that babies being born now in 2025 have a very good chance to see, to live to 75 years old. That's a good chance for age. And if they do live to 75, that means they will see the year 2100. Let that sink in. Babies being born now will see the year 2100. And in that process, when they get to that point, either two things will happen. They will either look back and be like, what were we doing? Why is our bodies full of plastic? How could they not understand that plastics are fossil fuels? How could they not deal with this crisis of imagination and create content and stories and come together to change the narrative around that. Fossil fuels are financing Hollywood. How can that change that? But this is the thing. As I close out this story, I close the story with that bridge that we crossed. And one of the things there is that we marched to justice and freedom. The prayer is that 75 years from now, in 2100, the next generation might not have a Martin Luther King, but maybe a Martha Queen who will lead the movement. And she will rise up. And she won't just say that we're fighting for equality, but we're fighting for existence. And she will say, or they will say, that we are not just free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we are free at last. But they will rise up and they will say, we are plastic free at last. Plastic free at last. Thank God Almighty, we are plastic free at last.